I'm going to start with a kindergarten task. And this kindergarten task is one that we actually piloted in Vermont. And I'm going to give each table a set of about 6 examples of work. And I'm also going to give you a copy of what the task was. You'll need to take a minute to read the task description. And remember, first step is read the task, and then as a group, what do you expect to see in the work? Before you even look at the work, what would you expect to see? So the task here is, I saw 4 kindergarten students lined up to go outside to play. Everyone was wearing boots and a hat. How many boots and a hat did I see in all? Show and tell how you know. So what do you expect? So just talk at your tables. What would you expect to see in the work? What are you looking for in the work? What are some things? Think about strategies, representation, reasoning, calculations. Okay? Talk at your tables.
Maybe some would go and besides just labeling 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, maybe they would count by twos. That might be, an advanced child at kindergarten. That'd be interesting to see.
And also, how do they account for the hats after they have addressed the boots? Are they combining them both, or are they just looking at one or the other?
Or are they forgetting one of the elements and only doing the feet or only doing the hats at that level? Sometimes it's hard for them to hold both elements and solve it that way.
I also think it'd be interesting to see if they count all from one person before adding, or counting all from the other person, or if they count all the boots and then all the hats and then combine those two together. So I'd be looking for how they're combining their the amounts.
And I'm wondering if anyone's actually going to do something besides a diagram for solution. Is somebody going to use the number line some way? Or are they going to use a table or a 10 frame? I can envision some of them getting up and get scrap materials and actually making the boots and making the hat and then gluing them on instead of the drawing.
Or even building it first and then recording what they built on their paper and how they're recording that. So
I guess I'm hoping that somehow they're going to make some kind of connection with something else. Whether they're making a connection with an animal that has, 4 feet or whatever it might be, or a triangle that has 3 sides or something like that. That would be an interesting connection.
Now take the samples of work and look and see what you see. You're actually going to see the work, and you're going to see what the teacher's scribing was on a sticky note for that work. So spend a little time sort of reviewing the samples, then decide, did they complete the task completely? Did they get close? Or did they just get started and not very far? I will say this was the first time these kindergarten students ever did a performance task. It was done early in the year, in November, and I'll tell you after you take a look what they also found, because it was the first time. So at least you know it's more like a pre-assessment. First time they're doing a problem-solving task with a counting component. Okay? So take a few minutes, look at the samples, talk about what you see.
Drew for people, drew for food, drew 1 hat.
1 boot for. She has a drawing, and she has it labeled 1, 2, 3.
It's sort of interesting that she thought each person would get 1 boot, but there would only be 1 hat. She would give 1 hat to each person.
And she even labeled a hat looks like this, and they get 1.
Yeah.
She didn't think about pairs.
I know, that's interesting, because in her drawing, she has the drawing people have 2 feet. So.
Well, and she has drawings of boots as 1, 2, 3, 4, but then they have 1 hat.
So once again, wondering if they have a clear understanding of the task, and you know, you think about their early numeracy is very
First time though, so understands that
Yeah.
you're going to draw a picture, you're
Yeah.
going to label with some numbers.
I would
and
agree.
you're actually going to
Yeah.
do some grouping because of all this circling.
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Started off well. Yeah, I would agree.
So these kids need some practice with acting out math stories. And
Yeah, mm-hmm.
That has a one-to-one correspondence labeled correctly up to 3.
Up to
Yes.
3. Yeah.
Well, Ant has it 1, 2, 3, 4 here,
With the boots.
Yep.
and new
but then
laws are
wasn't
looking
sure
pretty
what to
good,
do with
except
all
for
of
the
those
fact,
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not many reversals.
So in terms of our sort, should we put?
I would say that's in the next category for the fall. Are we thinking?
Are we
about-
doing 2 piles
We're doing
now?
2
Oh, we're
piles.
doing
Yeah,
two
we're
piles.
doing.
So no-
Yes. Okay.
Right.
You got to read this one. This is just so cool.
I figured out I know how to write a 4. I wanted to add another one. I knew I would write my name. I was trying to learn while sitting here.
Okay.
Good
Isn't that
effort.
cool? And then this one here. I
That
drew.
tells me that they're at a very
Beginning,
emergent level
yes.
because yes, he did write a 4
It
here.
is
He
a very
did.
nice
Yeah.
4.
And a
Yeah.
5, which is one more than 4.
Right, he
So
wanted
that-
to add, so
Yeah.
Exactly.
he's got
Yeah.
to do something with adding.
Because he caught on to the in all, that something's going to
Right.
happen,
Right.
you know, but
But
not
the
quite sure how to
represent-
do it.
Are we
Exactly.
reading into it and maybe he's just practicing writing his numbers?
that could very well
Well,
be.
he
Yes.
says he wanted to add another
Oh,
one.
it does say
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
So
that's
he
why
does
went-
say,
and knowing that the concept of one more than 4 is 5,
That's a good thing.
skill
That's a good
that-
way to start.
Absolutely. The only thing they're missing is that keeping track of that last hat.
Then circled the important information.
They
question.
did. That is
know, I
And
know.
It's much too strict.
Okay, so that is a nearly. So I'm guessing that this is, the teacher said that he counted 1 to 8, and then in an effort to represent 8, he wrote 6, or she.
So I see 4 boots and 4 hats.
Yep. And
Maybe
then
that's
4
where the
people.
8
I also see that he is representing and connecting a number to each of the
People.
and right, the people, and then they know that there are 4 boots and a hat, so they've illustrated each of these, and they even circled what they needed to do.
Looks like they have 4 hats.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, look at that! Oh no, this is a boot. This is a boot.
Or is this the boots?
I think that's a
1, 2, 3,
pom-pom
4.
on a hat.
Oh, okay,
These look like laces.
Yeah.
okay.
But they have
So
4
there's,
boots
oh, I
and
see.
4 hats.
1, 2, 3, 4. That's a boot,
Right.
and not a hat.
I think so.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Isn't
So
it?
they've given 1 boot and 1 hat per person.
Right.
Right. But they,
So
but
that's
this would
down here
be,
with
I
the-
would say this would be close to this one here. They're similar
They are.
because,
They're not making a connection. You need 2 boots for each person.
exactly,
But these would still be in the first category of objective not
They
met.
would.
yes.
They would.
Because they both have drawn all the people. This one drew 4 boots and 1 hat. This one drew 4 boots and 4 hats and 4 people. So I feel like they're on their
Closer
way.
to
They're closer
almost
than
there,
those guys
than
over
these
there.
guys.
So I
So
would,
when we worked with them in a situation, they're going to need something totally different than these here.
yeah.
And thinking about this, like in terms of students coming into school, this gives you a lot of like information in terms of like their understanding and things that you could work on as a teacher. Wow, it's interesting.
And now do we separate into 4?
Yeah. No. Okay. All right. Do you want to start here?
Start from this
Start
side?
here, that's gonna be
Yeah,
pretty easy.
it's usually.
Okay. All right. Objectives met. Objectives.
Fully met and exceeded.
So are we going to keep them in 2 piles for now?
well, what they're finding in the other group is, then they did the second sort, and they found that they took the ones that didn't get it, and they actually have one that they said, this looks like really emergent, very early. Then there's sort of like another stage, and then there's a very close. So they actually ended up with 3 possible piles, which is fine. So do a little bit of that, and then we'll talk as a large group.
Okay.
Okay?
Would you put this at met and exceeded because it labeled it in a way, the others.
Well, we want to think about that because, I mean, here we have clearly a child who gets it, they miss the labeling, but their level of thinking, from what I can discern from this, is a little more sophisticated than these two.
Like, that's borderline multiplicative reasoning.
Yeah, and they're thinking about in my mind, this child's probably subitizing and looking at groups, as you said, kind of moving more towards multiplicative reasoning.
I think as we were talking that these 4 have got it. Even though there's a
In
slight
different
error
ways.
here, but they would be in the got it. And these would be in the we need to untangle or we need to help them get to the next level, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
that's what I
because
think.
we can. It's very clear to see what those students are missing,
Right.
And
Where
it
we
would be
need to
pretty
go with
easy
them.
to make a list of what they would need next, or what
Yeah, what their
supports they would need in
skills
order
are
to get them
lacking.
to where they need to be.
Where they're tangled.
So let's just hear you share a few things that you noticed. I think everybody agreed that the student who said he was going to figure out how to write a 4, and he wanted to add another one, and he was going to write his name, and he was going to learn while he was sitting here. I'm sure everybody put that at the emerging end. What did you notice? What did you see in the work? Just what would your notes be if you were if this was one of the pieces of work you were scoring? What were some of the comments you made about this that the student is able to do right now?
He can form 4 and
Okay.
5 correctly.
Okay, you can write those numbers.
He knew that 4 and 1 more was 5.
Okay, because he says he wanted to add, and then he writes a 5. So you're kind of interpreting that at least he can add a number. Anything else? What is the student still needing to work on? Here.
What the problem is asking.
Right. Knows there's a math problem, gets started, but kind of loses track of what he has to do next. So in your notes, if this was typical of papers you put in that first pile, you'd be jotting some of those things down and then you'd be saying, what does the student need next? You might say they need the problem broken into shorter chunks. First do this, then do that. That would help students like that. I'd love to just hear some of your other comments about decisions you made. I know that there was one where a student was able to count to 8 but says, I don't know what an 8 looks like, so I wrote a 6. Seemed like a good strategy at the time, right? Just write any number. And another one where a student had a strategy but missed one in the counting where another student did something similar and got them all. So just a couple comments about what helped you to decide where you might have sorted it in terms of putting it into, they got it, they did extremely well with it, if there were any that or they were close. Because what I was hearing was there were a lot that got close but not quite. So just any comments about these, and then we'll look at a second task very quickly.
I struggled with this one in particular because this student, I think, would have gotten it if they hadn't missed that piece. And so I think about the arithmetic. You know, a lot of times we see students who clearly have an understanding of the concept, but then they make a mistake and they miss it. So then do we say, oh, they don't understand it, or it's an arithmetic piece? So
right. Do you think this student understands the task? Yes. Yeah, it's clear. And here's what I think. The teacher might go back and say, maybe what I should have done is said, show me how you got 11. And at that point, if the student started to point, they might have noticed that they missed one. So that's something that you get better at as you're doing that scribing or interviewing kids. How do you know your answer's correct?
What's great about looking at this data and the work that the student recorded is that if this was just a summative answers 11, they would have gotten it wrong.
Correct.
Whereas I would say this is a student who has a much better understanding of what the problem is asking them to do and just made a very small error. But the error, I still feel like what they wrote and what they said shows understanding.
Right. So when you're doing this sort and you're thinking of what does this student need next, this student probably doesn't need as much as some of the papers you put in the didn't quite get it pile. So that might help you when you're sorting your own papers. If it's so close that it was a minor error, they clearly understood the problem, they represented it appropriately, and there was a minor error, you might tend to put it in the got it pile because their next steps for instruction are going to be more similar to other papers you put in that pile. So that was one there was a lot of conversation about because there clearly was another one where a student did count all of them and self-corrected, and I think that was a pretty clear one. But there was this other one. I'll just hear your comments about this one. This was the student who has 2 boots and a hat, 2 boots and a hat. Maybe this is the first one, 2 boots and a hat, and then they started to look like boots. There are some numbers there. It looks like a 16, but I think it's a reversal of a 12, a 2. And what the student said was 12. I saw there's 3 things on each one, and it makes 12. So just some comments about that, because this is a student who didn't do what you expected them to do, but what did you see in this piece of work?
I was thinking that, you know, this child was like starting to subitize. They were looking at the groups, which would be moving into that multiplicative thinking. So I thought that of all the work, that without knowing this particular student, without probing more, that their understanding was a little more sophisticated in terms of their other students. Not being said, you know, not looking at the dots. So now looking at the dots is probably a little different.
Well, and I think in order to make a definitive, in order to be able to figure out whether or not they're using any sort of subitizing or multiplicative reasoning, you just have, it would be important to talk to the student and find out what was their thinking and how did they get those numbers. Right. Without that information, it's hard to gauge.
Sure. I think people would agree this is a student who's ready for more. Maybe ready to become more sophisticated, maybe is thinking a little bit more abstractly because the student is not writing a one-to-one correspondence type of counting, but probably needs some work on how to represent the problem so that it's clear to someone else what that is. So this is just a good example of they don't all fall into nice, neat categories, but when you think of what do they need next, this student is more similar to the ones who have a counting strategy, and maybe they could work with each other to create better diagrams and create better other counting strategies. Any other comments about this one? We took a little time on it, but I think it's worth just seeing what the possibilities are in the work, because even though we're kind of sorting the work, we're going to see those that are, so always think of it as what's most similar about these, and think of the next steps of instruction as being good for this group of kids. Yes?
So initially I thought this was a really abstract way of showing their work, but now looking at it closer, it almost looks like each one has a head.
Yep.
And then there's the 2 boots, so it's 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3. Right, so there's 4 groups of 3 when you really look at it more carefully.
Nice.
So it's not as abstract as it appears the first time once you start connecting.
Yeah, first it looked a little random. And that's why we really have to just, what do you actually see? And so and because they're kindergarten, a boot looks more like an L than anything else, right? Okay, great. Thanks for doing that. So now we're going to just switch gears a little bit.